Hey everyone, I'm in the bathtub with my Kimber again. Isn't that awesome? It's been a while since I've been in the bathtub with the Kimber. And look, I've got the whole grips on it. I don't know if that was on there the last time. Anyway, I have this little blue shop towel to put it on. And you're like, why? Well, the bathtub really isn't a great place for a Kimber. And, you get all those hand oils on it, and the guys at the gun store said, if I wasn't careful, it was going to start to rust. Can't have that. Can't have that. So now when I handle it unnecessarily, I put on the gloves and have a little shop towel so that, it's all snug and warm and safe. I didn't know this, it was all new to me when I first got, this stuff. It was like, oh, wow. I didn't realize I was going to have a Metallurgy 101 course or something. I was like, oh, very sheltered digital, child of the digital revolution. So anyway, so today we have Spirit here with us, and we're going to be talking about really, scary stuff, as far as I'm concerned. But just we're going to get into what it means to be king. Now you're all going, what did he say? And it's just I'm an American, right? So, that's sort of oxymoron, isn't it? To believe in America and democracy and then talk about kings. What is that? What is that? Especially in America, it's rebellion against kings and all that. So it's Well, what happened was that, you see, my mom and my dad, when they went on their first date, my mom had this vision that he and she would get married, go to California, and have a child, and that child would have to be named David, and then that child would create something new. So I've heard this story all my life, basically. And, I don't really know what to tell you, because my mom was very interesting, because she has all these weird intuitive insights, and many times, or almost all the time, they're true, over and over again. See, my dad was the brains, you see, and my mom was sort of the intuition, and between the two of them, they took care of most situations, with, enough so that everyone lived another day, which is saying a lot considering some of the situations. So anyway, so that was there, and so when I was growing up, I always thought I would do something special, but I had no idea what it was, and I always wanted it to be in media, and I always wanted it to be in the arts, because essentially growing up, that was all there was to really sink your teeth into. And there wasn't a lot of, I wasn't in the public schools because my parents didn't like them. There was teachers all spoke Spanish, and they were, some of the elements were sort of gritty, and they didn't have me there, so I was homeschooled, in part. That was a large part of the reason. And so anyway, so then I grew up, my dad died, went through all sorts of stuff, and now, and through all of this, there's always been Spirit. Spirit's been with me since pretty much almost as long as I can remember. I think there's some times, but it's always, some form or other. And so, she's, and what happened was that one time I told my dad about Spirit, and he was like, oh, she's an imaginary friend that you've developed because of all the stress we've been through. And, that was sort of a far cry from spiritual mentor, But then, my dad was a big believer in existentialism and Andre Gide, idea of, God, son of man, and all that stuff. So, and then my mom wholeheartedly believed that Spirit really was, spirit, as it were. And so between the two, for a very long time, I had a really hard time trusting that actually Spirit really existed, because it just seemed too good to be true. And, my dad had this big thing about the people who believed in spirituality and religion were really people who were afraid to accept the fact of their mortality. Because they were frightened of death, they had made up all this stuff that really no one could know, and what you really needed to do was to just face the fact that you were going to die, and that was it. And to do anything less was the act of a coward. So you turn to religion like a crutch. You turn to spirituality like a crutch. Whereas my mom thought it was the bastion and the backbone of everything sacred in the universe. So I was raised between these two polar opposites, which was great, because when I went out into the world, I found I had radically different ideas about spirituality and philosophy than almost anyone I'd ever known, or actually anyone I have ever known. And it was just like my grandparents. You see, my dad was Jewish from Beverly Hills. My mom was part of a WASP family, except that when she was 12, she said that she couldn't believe that God had condemned to hell whole vast swaths of humanity, like all the Chinese, all the people in India, all the people in Africa, etc., or anywhere, simply for the fact that they hadn't read the Bible. She thought that was cruel and capricious, and it belittled someone to believe in a God that would do something like that. So she left the Christian church at 12. But she still believed in spirituality. She just didn't believe in the spirituality as it was being taught. Her family accepted this, which is amazing. But they didn't accept it when she married a Jew from Beverly Hills. And so I don't have any memory really of my grandfather at all. No image to attach to him. My grandmother on my mother's side I saw briefly once, when she came to visit, a very vague memory, and she was constantly disapproving. And then on my dad's side, well, the family was basically run by my grandmother on my dad's side, and the father, while extraordinarily successful to the point that he was in Beverly Hills, he worked as an engineer for the U.S. Navy, designing extremely elite, and sophisticated radar systems, etc. And some of those ships are still in service today. But he never said anything. It was just in the family, he just never said anything. Whatever it was that grandma said was what they did. And so he was cool to be around for some reason, but I don't really have much memory of him ever. I don't remember the sound of his voice because he never said anything. So but grandma was so pissed that dad married a Gentile that she refused to call me by my given name in protest, because one, I shouldn't have been born to begin with, and if I was to be born, I should have been named after my grandfather. So I would have been Aaron. So anyway, so that was sort of the context in which I was raised, because there was no extended family, and what little contact there was very hostile. And because of my dad's medical condition, and because of the neighborhood that, my mother made great money, the medical costs were so high that we lived essentially 3 blocks from where Rodney King was beaten. And so I didn't go out in the neighborhood very much. That was my first exposure to guns, actually, was in that neighborhood. So that was sort of the setting. And, I went through that. When my dad died, and I went to college, I went to journalism, I went to university, and I started, doing, the artist, I got, I won't get into this now, but I got a largesse that helped me invest in the photo equipment, and I sank everything I had into it to try to get the absolute best equipment, to try to get the absolute best vision, because that's sort of what the philosophy my dad had taught me, was that you always go for better equipment within reason, because the worst equipment just never pays for itself in the end, and I always have found that that's true for the most part. So anyway, I invested everything I had in that, and I started merrily trying to make it out there, and I didn't, I had no clue. I just had no clue what I was getting into, and that's just the way it is. But So anyway, I don't know, on some level I began the process that this wasn't exactly working out like the fairy tales told you it was supposed to. And, I just found myself constantly in a position where essentially I had to ruin what I created in order for it to be seen at all, and I never, ever accepted it. Just never accepted it. Ever. And, you can just, that's up to you what you think of that. That's what happened. And so, anyway, so then that, what I started, this is at this point like about a year into it, I started, because, we were running out of money and none of it was coming in and none of it showed any sign of coming in. I wasn't getting, I had no friends, I had nothing, I mean, I had great work, that everyone all over, millions of views on some of these pictures, but no one ever approached me, never PM'd me or anything. I mean, it was just like, I was like a distant lighthouse and no one ever approached or something. I mean, it just, whatever. And you could just say, you say whatever you want, but that was just, the impression that was going on at the time. And so, I began to have these nightmares. I mean, I never had nightmares. I wasn't someone who never had nightmares, never had any problem with that. I started for the first time in my life to have nightmares. And, in these nightmares, I was with my mother in our VW, car, which I had no end of torment about from people who joked about me having a VW. But what can I say? It was what I could afford. It's what was there. And, we were in this VW and we were driving on a pier that stretched out just into the horizon over the ocean, just way out into the ocean, okay? And we start out from the beach and we're driving along and there's plenty of room, and there's plenty of civilization, and we're driving along, and then as you continue to go out, the pier becomes narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower, and then you begin to feel like further and further from the shore, and you're beginning to see this ocean just all around you, endlessly, and just all around you, and vast and infinite, and you're all, and the pier is getting narrower and narrower, and then you realize that it's becoming too narrow, that in a few moments you won't even be able to turn around, but it's already too late now somehow. By the time you realize that you had already passed the point where you could actually turn the car around, and now the only way would be like to reverse, and that would be impossible because, it's becoming narrow, and you're like, you're going further and further out into the ocean and further out. And now like the rails are disappearing, and now there's no rails, and so now there's no rails on this thing, and you're even further out, and there's no one around, there's no ships, there's nothing, just the sun and the ocean and the horizon, and the planks are becoming worse and more unwieldy, and it's becoming in ragged and worse repair, and you're beginning to realize, where are we? I would wake up and just fucking panicked on all belief, man. I mean, it's like, wow, and I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been around things that are like really large, or been around things that are just, the scale becomes so unbelievably fast and almost terrifying, And so, I would wake up from these things and I would just be, I would just be beside myself, and so I would, I'd call up my mom and I would just start screaming at her. I mean, she had no idea what, and it would just be like, I had no defenses against it. I was just, and this happened week after week for like months. And, and I couldn't stop the work, right? So I kept trying to do the work. And so, one day, like, Spirit came to me and said, listen, why don't we like spend some time meditating together? And so like, I went and we said, oh, whatever. Okay. So we would meditate together, and that was the first time I began to feel like these like extraordinary energies. I don't know how to put them, like just really intense spiritual, mental, or like, energies, or through the spine energies or something, whatever you would want. It's difficult to explain, and they would have all these images with them, and some of them, I mean, I won't lie to you, they were just like explicitly sexual, like whoa, or it's like shoot, and others were really mystical and sort of spiritual, and others were just sort of like, wow. And in this, excuse me, I try to get more comfortable. The bathtub isn't the best, but in these moments there would be like real insights into like the feminine energy, and then like real insights into the masculine energy, and just how beautiful they were, and how well they came together, and how different but equal they were, and just, and just these forms of beauty, and forms of, it was just, and it was like unbelievably intense. And like, I remember at one point like seeing like a goddess, having sex with like some male like god or something, and the orgasm she had and the look she had in her eyes and her face was just so unbelievable. It was enough to keep you up at nights, like fuck. And then like, 3 or 4 days later, I was like with spirit or something, and like for whatever reason I had like one of the best orgasms of my life. I was like, damn, that's what it's supposed to be like. Wow. I went around feeling a sense of relief for 3 days. Man. So anyway, all this was happening, and so then I was like, I went on this shoot with this, really lovely young model who was trying desperately to make it in Hollywood without selling out her sexuality. And I don't think she succeeded. And I think she managed to protect her sexuality, but she didn't make it because she told me story after story. She even got onto this film as basically a guaranteed success. And then the director, the producer came out and started making statements that she couldn't possibly live with herself if she continued to be a part of it. So she had to get out of her contract and screw it all. And that was her, like, chance to become a star. And it's real serious, okay? Well, it's the actors and actresses don't fuck around with their chance to become a star, all right? So, she actually ditched it. But she had lots of stories like that. And I really respected her. And so anyway, like we were going on this shoot, and like, and she was like, I'm so lonely, whatever. And we took these, but anyway, but we didn't, it was all artistic. So we took all these pictures, and, some of them now I sort of blanched to see, but whatever it was in the post-production and during the shots, I just did things that I'd never done before. I mean, I just went way out there into just way out wacky, crazy things, and for some reason, that was like one of the first times I thought that, like, I was really adding a little more color to the work. That wasn't just, everyone was supposed to want to see this, and so, and that was sort of like a turning point. It was like a milestone for me, at least personally, even though later I've had people mock some of those pictures, but that's true for virtually everything. But it was still like this real turning, point, and, and some of them really said things, and that I really hadn't said before. And so and so that just continued. So it went on, and I did all these other pictures, and as time went on, my circumstances became increasingly dire. I mean, I was still floating along, but and and that's when spirit began to talk about being king. And I was like, well, what exactly is that supposed to mean, Spirit? Because we're in America and Americans don't have kings. She says, well, I'm not suggesting America has a king, but I am suggesting that humanity has a king, and that a king isn't someone who wanders around giving everyone orders and telling them what to do and, being served by them. A king is the connection between humanity and God, or at best, a connection between people and what's sacred. And, I was like, huh, okay, so why would it be me? She says, well, we don't need, She says, well, I know a lot of people on your planet, and, I have a lot of people I could choose from. And, I will tell you that, you see, about 200 to 300 years ago, this is what she said, okay? A bunch of Jewish men who were very kind-hearted got together, and they prayed that humanity could one day have a ruler who was actually kind. And they prayed so hard and with such vigor that I had no choice but to grant their wish, and now I have you here. And I was like, what the fuck? Which I guess wasn't a very respectful response. And she says, well, most people, she says, aren't kind. And she says, in fact, most people who are powerful or have any kind of success will tell you that at some point they did something evil and probably felt that they were supposed to do it, or justified in doing it, or maybe it's just a fact of life, but she says, you're more like, a white lion in that, you basically won't do evil, and you'll let, you'll be, you would rather be, shit out through the drain and run off through the sewer so that you can go find freedom in the sea, than to compromise about 1 or 2 or 3% on something relatively incidental that you've got that into your head you think is critically important. And the thing is that most of the time, David, you're right. So she's and so anyway, be that as it may, she says I'm sort of like a white lion, which she says is even rarer than just lions because and it's almost, and she says it basically puts you in this really impossible position, she says, because they don't respect kindness. They laud kindness, but they don't respect kindness. And so to play that role is extraordinarily difficult. So anyways, so she says, and when I'm with her, she brings on these gathering feelings of intense power, which is weird. And so one day I said to her, you make me feel very powerful. And it's hard to explain this because, I don't really have any basis for it because I'm not really ooh, look at my big muscles, or ooh, look at my heavy, my deep bank account, or, ooh, look at my art that causes women to disrobe when they glance at it, or anything. And she's like, well, David, power isn't a feeling, power is a fact. I was like, oh. And, I've been thinking and thinking about that, and I still haven't completely gotten my head around that. But anyway, so, she says, really, my problem is not believing that I'm king enough as opposed to trying not to feel like I'm some sort of megalomaniac, because she says, believe me, this isn't really a role that's going to be, real gratifying in the ego department, she says, because no one wants to hear it. So, it's like, huh, and so I'm thinking I'm going through oh, is this some sort of self-aggrandizement, or is this an artistic tool of expression, or she's well, no, you're king, and you need to accept it, you're king, and believe it or not, human beings have kings, and America hasn't really had one before, so that's why they have no clue what to do with you. And she says, and no, this doesn't mean you're supposed to give up all your ideals, you have a form of government, it works just fine. But, spiritual leaders are spiritual leaders, and, that's what they are, she says, David. They don't, it doesn't matter what anyone thinks, what God wants is what God wills.